first few questions are really quite easy, just to kind of get us a little warmed up here. So, do you consent to this interview being filmed today?
I do.
Perfect. Could you please state your full name and then spell it all for me as well?
Full name is William, you want middle name?
Sure.
William Howard Piper. It's spelled William, and the middle name is spelled Howard, and the last name is spelled Piper.
Perfect. And do you have a preferred name that you wish to go by throughout this interview?
I probably prefer to be called Bill.
Bill? Okay. Thank you so much. Well, Bill, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for taking time out of your day to come and speak with me. I know this can be a little jarring, talking about your own life with cameras and lights and stuff like that, but I'm really excited to interview you today. So thanks for making the time.
You're welcome.
I want to start kind of with your just general early life. So could you please share with me where you were born and what early childhood looked like for you?
Well, I was born on Bonbright Street in Flint in 1933. The beginning of the Depression years. From that location, we moved to 1410 Woodcroft, just off Miller Road, which is the house that I remember growing up in as a young boy. We lived there until I was 5 years old. Unfortunately, when I reached 5 years old, my father died. And so my mother, as a widow of 29 years of age, had to pick up her 3 sons and move us to Ann Arbor, where she went back to school, where she had graduated as an undergraduate. She went back to get a master's degree in clinical psychology, which women at that time didn't do, but she did. And we lived in Ann Arbor for 3 years. And then in 1942, we moved back to Flint and lived at 510 Crapo Street, right across from the Flint Public Library now on this. And so that's the locations of my early childhood. I went to Zimmerman School for the kindergarten and first grade. I went to Angel School in Ann Arbor for second, third, and fourth grade, and then came back and I went to the old Walker School. I went to the old Kersley School for fifth grade, and the old Walker School for sixth grade, and then went through Whittier in Flint Central, where I graduated. Do you need any?
No, that's great. No, that's great. You said we a couple times. Do you have siblings then?
I have 2 brothers.
Okay, tell me about them a little bit more.
My older brother Harry, who's deceased. He was 2 years older than I was, and he went away in 8th grade to military academy in Delafield, Wisconsin, and spent the rest of his education away from home. After he graduated from Delafield, he went to the University of Michigan and then went through as an undergraduate and then went to law school and became an attorney. Interestingly enough, he joined a law firm in Detroit after he graduated from law school. After I graduated from Flint Central, I went to Yale. And when I came home from Yale 4 years later, thinking I was going to go to work for General Motors, which didn't turn out to be the case, I wound up working being employed and having been offered a job and being employed by the Genesee Bank, the old Genesee County Savings Bank. I accepted that job and thought that I would stay there until General Motors called. Well, 39 years later, General Motors still hadn't called, and so I retired from the bank. However, interestingly enough, about 2 years after I joined the bank, my brother and I were having at a family dinner, and he said, "I'm changing jobs." And I said, "What are you going to do?" He says, "I'm coming to work at the same bank you're working at." I said, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to be their trust officer. And so for the next over 30 years, we worked together at the bank. My younger brother, who was 4 years younger, after he went through the same schools that I did as far as Whittier and Central, and then he went to MIT. And after he graduated from MIT, went to Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and got a doctorate in chemistry, and then returned to Massachusetts, where MIT it was. He had married, and he became a professor and head of the Department of Chemistry at Simmons College, which is where he retired ultimately from. And he is now living and still living in Massachusetts.
You're a very educated family. Wow. Would you say you got that from your mother, considering she got such a high level of education in the 30s?
My mother was an exceptionally bright woman. She graduated as valedictorian of our high school graduating class, which was the first full graduating class at Central in 1926. She was junior Phi Beta Kappa at the University of Michigan, which meant that she was one of the top 10 students at the University of Michigan. Very bright lady, extremely bright. My father was also extremely accomplished as well, although I didn't know my father that well on this. So we were blessed with a set of genes that came through. So some of that I can't claim credit for. It's just the blessing of a good inheritance.
But you seem to really appreciate it, and it seems like you and your brothers definitely took advantage of the opportunities that were in front of you. Because I don't think anyone goes to MIT or Yale like yourself without some serious hard work.
Well, frankly, I'm the least educated of my three because my younger brother, of course, graduated from MIT and then went on and got a doctorate in chemistry. My older brother graduated from the University of Michigan and then wound up going to law school and graduating with honors from the law school. So I only have an undergraduate education from Yale. So I'm the least educated of my family.
Well, I don't think anyone's looking down on your resume by any means. So. Could you tell me just more about your mother? I'm just kind of curious to learn more about her. You know, a woman raising 3 boys and then getting a master's degree and working. Tell me more about her.
Well, she was an only child. And she lost her father when she was 9 years old. And my grandmother raised my mother alone. And then subsequently, my grandmother did remarry. And so my mother had a stepfather who was extremely good to her in her growing up years. But my grandmother and my step-grandfather did not have any more children. So my mother still remained an only child. She went back to the University of Michigan after my father died to get a degree in clinical psychology. And when she completed that degree, she came back. She was going to go to work since she was a single mother at that point. But the war had broken out. World War II had broken out. And so instead of going to work at that time, she volunteered for the Red Cross, writing the case histories for the servicemen who were having mental problems overseas and whose family lived locally. And she did that throughout the war years. And then after the war ended, she went to work at Hurley Hospital and became the clinical psychologist. Hurley at that time was the only hospital that had a psychiatric unit. And she worked as the psychologist to the head psychiatrist. And then in 1950, she remarried and stopped working. And so from that point on, she was a homemaker again.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that with me.
You're welcome.
Now, most people that grow up in Flint very much define themselves by the high schools that they come from and go to and belong to. So can you tell me more about your high school experience and what that was like for you here as well?
The high school experience was a wonderful experience for me. Flint Central at that time had just an outstanding set of faculty and teachers and administrators. I had no thought of going away to college. It was only because Florence Fredell, who was the vice principal of Central High School at the time, came to me when I was a senior in high school and said that they had not had anybody go east to school and felt that I could qualify and encouraged me to apply. And that's how I happened to wind up going to Yale instead of going to Albion, which is where my grandfather wanted me to go because he was a staunch Methodist and thought all of his grandchildren should be educated at Albion. So it was a little bit of a shock to him to have his grandson pick up and go east to school, but he accepted it. My mother had graduated in 1926 as the sole valedictorian of her high school graduating class. I graduated in 1951 as the sole valedictorian of my Flint Central High School graduating class as well, of which there were 666 kids.
Yeah, no small feat.
Well,
would you say that you liked school? I mean,
oh
you know,
yes,
it takes
oh
a lot
yes,
of work to do
yes,
something like that.
yes. I enjoyed it, but that's to a great extent because the faculty made it so. I had a favorite teacher at Flint Central by the name of Mildred Hodgeges, who taught United States history and then got permission to teach the top students in the school a secondary course called Contemporary Problems, in which she required that all of the students find a project, arrange a field trip, and write a paper about the project, which we all did. Mildred Hodges was Oxford educated, but she was deaf. And so she wore hearing aids and didn't have too much trouble communicating. But she was an amazingly bright lady. And I well remember the first exam that she gave. There were probably 20 students in the class that I took with her. She had a very small class. And she announced that we would write our first exam 6 weeks after we had enrolled in the class. We would write on a single question. We would write for an hour. And the question that we would answer was what caused the American Revolution. None of us had ever been in a class where a teacher had ever announced in advance what the exam was going to be and what the question on the exam was going to be. It was all the exams were surprise exams in high school. So this was a shock to all of us. And I can remember what happened was that all of us got together and talked about what we thought Ms. Mildred Hodges wanted us to write about. In the next 6 weeks, Mildred Hodges drew just a straight chalk line on the board and traced all of the events leading up to the American Revolution. And every time she traced an event, each one of us would ask, was that the thing that you thought caused the American Revolution? And she never would indicate. So at the end of 6 weeks, after she had traced all of the events leading to the American Revolution, she handed us all a piece of paper with a pencil and said, you tell me now what caused the American Revolution. It was an amazing experience. And she wasn't the only one that, as the teacher, she's just the one that I remember probably as being the closest. I should probably tell you that at the end of that course, she called me into her classroom alone and sat me down and said, "Bill, I want to tell you something. There's a lesson you have not learned." And she said, "The lesson you have not learned is you have never learned how to fail." And as a kid who had built his life on achievement and who was about to graduate as the sole valedictorian of his high school graduating class, to have a teacher tell you that the lesson you hadn't learned was you hadn't learned how to fail, it was a shock. However, Mildred Hodgeges was absolutely right, because when I went away to Yale, there were 1,000 young men who also were in my class. Every single one of them had graduated as valedictorian of their high school graduating class. Every single one of them had credentials far beyond my credentials. And there was no way I could excel in the same way I'd excelled in high school. And I had to learn to be less than the top achiever. Mildred was right. It was a real significant adjustment for me.
As you say, too, I think most of us are conditioned to try to never fail.
Yeah.
Like, that's the goal, is never fail. And but you're right, and I think she was right too. There's a lot of learning in failure.
Yeah.
Wow, what an impactful lesson to learn. I mean, what, 17 maybe? 18?
Yes,
yeah.
At the time. Mm-hmm. And to have a teacher whom you had great respect for come and tell you that was a bit of a shock on this. And yet, it wasn't until a few years afterwards that I realized how right she was in her evaluation of me and this sort of thing. And to some extent, it was a helpful thing because I never forgot, and I never failed to understand that you didn't have to be at the top and still be able to achieve. That you could still make a significant contribution even if you were not at the top or the best.
Sorry, I did let that resonate a little bit. That's a big life lesson to learn.
Yes.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to her again?
Yes.
And give her some
As a matter of fact, when I went to Yale, I took a United States history class because I loved it so. So I took another class from her, and I sent all of the exam questions from that class back to her so she would know what they were, what kind of exam questions the professors at Yale were asking their students who were taking that kind of class. But I made her promise that she would never tell her students that she had where she got the questions from, because I didn't want to have a bad reputation coming back and having somebody say, "You did that to me."
Now, just out of personal curiosity, I have to ask, do you remember what you cited as the cause of the American Revolutionary War?
No, I can't tell you today, but I am sure, as I think back, that it wasn't. It was like many things in life, where it's a series of events that lead you down a path, and then all of a sudden, there is one that triggers you to say, either I don't want to do this anymore, or this is something, I finally learned the lesson. Something will trigger it. And so whether it was the shot heard round the world that was that trigger point or not, but I think I remember writing that theme in my paper to her, that it was a buildup of events that were that caused the American Revolution, that finally the trigger point, and I think it was the shot heard around the world, that finally motivated the country to say, this is not the way we want to live.
Very cool. Before we move on to talk about your college days and thereafter, I'm curious to ask you what Flint was like for you here growing up through high school. Tell me about that Flint in that era.
Let me say, I got the best of Flint. I grew up during the years General Motors was at its peak. So the community was an affluent, prosperous, growing community that had a lot of opportunity in it. In fact, when I was at Yale, there was an article that came out in one of the papers that said the highest wages in the country were being paid in the city of Flint. And when I graduated from high school with my classmates, everybody stayed in Flint. If you went on to college, you came back and got a white-collar job at General Motors. If you didn't go on to college, you went down and got a blue-collar job. But everybody went to work for General Motors. And that's fully what I expected to do when I came back from Yale, except at that point, the circumstances just didn't. Why, I'm not sure, but they didn't materialize, which was probably one of the greatest blessings I received, because the opportunity at the bank turned out to be a far better opportunity for me than General Motors would have been on this. But I remember, downtown was prosperous. That's where all of the activity was. There was just affluent, upscale kinds of opportunities and for everybody in the community. I always said, because I got the best, I owed back. I owed back because today it isn't the best. And today there are a lot of people that don't have the same opportunities that I had. And because of that, I want to make it possible to try to make others, or give some others a chance.
Fantastic. I just want to kind of now talk about kind of your young adulthood, basically. So, what year did you go to Yale?
I was in Yale from 1951 to 1955.
51 to 55. And then what did you decide to study? What was your major?
Economics.
It was economics. Okay.
And the only reason it was economics is because they didn't have a business school at Yale at that time, and economics was the closest you could come to taking a business course.
And why did you select that?
Because I fully expected to come back and go to work in Flint and probably at General Motors, and I thought a business degree was probably what would help me the most. And so that's why I majored in economics.
And did you enjoy it, or was it really just a means to an end?
That was interesting. I enjoyed a number of the courses. But I also wound up taking some elective courses at Yale. I took a history of art course. I took a classical civilization course. And I found that I enjoyed those courses immensely. And I can remember thinking at the time, wow, I wonder if I'm in the wrong field because I'm enjoying the electives, some of the electives more than I'm enjoying my major on this. So it was just a passing thought. I didn't change my major. I stayed with economics, and I think economics was the right place probably for me to be. But I had some wonderful other opportunities to do some studying in fields that I never would have thought I would have been interested in.
Was it common for people at that time to switch majors a lot? I know when I went to school, it was almost assumed that no one that started with one major would stick with it all.
No, I think that was true when I went too. That once you establish your major, you almost, the way the structure of the academics was, that you had to declare a major. And so if you would have changed your major, you had to take so many courses in your major field. If you changed your major, you would have had to extend the time that you were at Yale. And so most people stayed with whatever the major is that they originally selected. Yeah.
So let's talk about your first job then. So you go to Yale. You expected to move back to Flint. You do in the mid-50s, and you expected to work for General Motors. Did you apply for jobs at General Motors?
I came home in March of my senior year, made application at AC Sparkplug, was interviewed, and was sort of was given the impression that yes, I could get a job. So I went back after spring break and completed the remaining part of my senior year. Came back after graduation, contacted General Motors, and they said they'd call. After 2 weeks, I'd not received any phone call. I went down to see my uncle because, of course, at that point, my father wasn't living, and I said to my uncle, who was running the real estate business with my grandfather, I said, what do you think I ought to do? And he said, well, I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket. I'd apply some other places. And he says, one of the places you can apply is the Genesee Bank. His office happened to be in the Genesee Bank building. He said, you can apply if you want. But he also said to me, I'm a director of that bank. If you apply, and if they would by any chance hire you, I want you to know that I don't believe in nepotism, and I'm going to be harder on you if you are an employee of that bank than I am on anybody else. Well, I did go down. I did apply. I became their first college graduate management trainee at the bank, and my uncle lived up to his reputation of saying he would the hardest any person in the bank. Anytime I had to make a presentation to the board of directors, anytime I had to be with them, my uncle asked me the hardest questions. And this.
Sorry, you mentioned you were the first college graduate management trainee. Can you explain that a little bit more to me?
Well, the bank evidently had not had any management trainees in this, and because of my background in education, they began that program with me being the first. And it was, I don't know all of the discussions that went on because obviously I wasn't privileged to be a part of those, but my sense is that they were thinking about successor management in the organization. To be very honest with you, I didn't know I was the first college graduate management trainees. It wasn't until sometime later, and I can't remember when, that I learned that that was in fact what the classification I was under on this. Another piece of that story is the department that I was first assigned to was the consumer loan department in the bank, and my responsibility was collecting bad debts. The day that I walked into the department was the day I met my wife. She was a clerk in the department at that point, ultimately became secretary in the department. But she was working there, and we worked at the bank together. She could always tell me exactly what I was wearing the day that I arrived at the bank. And I said, that's not strange, because as a college kid, I only had one suit and one sport coat, so I can tell you I didn't have much choice about what I wore at that point. We met in 1955. We got married in 1959. And that's...
So, from the point that you met her, how soon did you start dating?
We started dating probably about 6 months after that. Dated for probably about a year and a half, and then we broke up. And I dated another gal in the interim, and that second relationship didn't work out. And so then I went back and re-established the relationship with my ultimate wife in this. So there was a period of time that we were not together, as we were not dating, and almost a couple of years.
Interesting, very cool.
That,
and that was Joyce, correct?
that was Joyce.
Yeah. What was her maiden name?
Foster.
Joyce Foster.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about her, just in general, like her
Yeah.
family?
Yes.
And,
Her father was a tool and die maker at General Motors, and she had one brother who's still living, and who went to Ferris, became a he went into oh dear, it was where you would do in the investigation of restaurants to make sure that they are, yeah, beg pardon?
like a health inspector?
Yeah, it was that kind of health that, and that was his field at Ferris. And then Joyce and her brother had an aunt and uncle, her mother's younger sister, who lived in Oregon. And both Joyce and her brother were extremely close to the aunt and uncle. Had Joyce and I not gotten married, Joyce would have moved to Oregon. When her brother graduated from Ferris, he did move to Oregon and went to work for the health department out in Oregon, and then subsequently married, and he is still living out in Oregon with his family and with his granddaughter at this point. So, yes.
Do you know how Joyce ended up at the bank? Was it just found a job?
Joyce would like to have gone on to college. Unfortunately, in those days, her parents, being of relatively modest means, felt they could only educate one of their two children, and felt that they needed to educate the son. And so Joyce, who desperately wanted to go to college, was not able to go. And so it was just I don't know how she got referred to the bank, but I think there was a fair amount of opportunity for young people in all of the banks at that point, and I'm sure she may have known somebody who was there who encouraged her to make application. Because she had applied and was hired a year before I was. And she was in a clerical position in that consumer loan department. She ultimately went back, took some college courses. She ultimately became secretary to one of the vice presidents in the bank before she left, because once we married, she left the bank and became a stay-at-home wife and then ultimately a stay-at-home mother. Yeah.
Very cool. So you took this bank job because you obviously needed a job and you had a connection to at least get you started. You're in this pre-management program, and you're also in collecting bad debt in the collections department. Not exactly what you set out to do, which is always fine, but you ended up staying at Genesee Bank for a long time. So what were kind of some of the steps that led to you just deciding to stay, that this was your new work?
What happened was that I went to work in June of 1955 for the bank. On the 1st of July of 1957, the Genesee County Savings Bank merged with the Merchants and Mechanics Bank, which was the smallest of the 4 banks in the city of Flint. The banks were Citizens Commercial and Savings Bank, Michigan National, Genesee County Savings Bank, and Merchants and Mechanics. The largest was Citizens. Genesee was next. Michigan National was the only national bank, and they were under a different set of regulations. We were state banks. And Merchants and Mechanics was a state bank, but it was a very small bank. Genesee County Savings Bank and Merchants and Mechanics merged, as I said, in July of 1957. When that happened, the management of both banks merged together. They had basically the same structure that we had at the Genesee County Savings Bank. So there were a vice president in charge of mortgages at Genesee. There was a vice president in charge of mortgages at Merchants. They had to blend all of those positions. Many of the people left to join other organizations, but one of their top people, by the name of John Butler, joined the bank, became head of operations at Genesee County Bank, and became my mentor. And John and I worked closely together, and John ultimately became the president of the bank before I became the president. But he was a primary reason for my staying at the bank, because he was extremely good to me, open all sorts of opportunity. From being a collector in the installment loan department, I then became a branch manager and ran one of their branches out in the Beecher district. And from the branch manager, I became head of their personnel department. From being head of the personnel, I became head of their IT department, then became their chief operations officer, then became head of their lending department. And as I explained to others, after I'd gone through all of those responsibilities, they finally discovered that there wasn't anything else that they could find to put me in, so they made me the president. Which was, I'll tell you, there's a story that goes with this. The only reason that I had any success as the president of the bank was because of the people that worked at that bank. My brother, who was a tremendous support and who was the chief financial officer, along with a whole group of other people who were a support team. People used to come in and ask me how I liked running the bank. And I used to say, I don't run the bank. I said, let me take you over to a line of tellers who each day wait on our customers who come in to either get money or cash checks or do some other transactions. If our customers like the way that they're treated by those tellers, they'll come back. But if they don't, they'll go right down the street, get the same dollar bill from our competitor that we can give them. And I said, in truth, these people run the bank, along with a whole bunch of other people that back them up and a whole bunch of other people that carry on other customer service responsibilities. And I said, if it weren't for the quality of those people and the fact that they worked as well together as they did, I would never have been able to run the bank or be president of the bank and have that responsibility work as well as it did.
So you had several positions before you really kind of climbed the ladder. So I think you mentioned your first job there was 1955, and you were there for about 35 years?
I retired from the bank in 1993.
93, okay.
So I worked 38 years.
Yeah, 38, okay, yeah. That's a lot of positions to have in kind of a short amount of time.
Yeah, it was.
How long were you president for?
I was president from 1985 to 1993, about 8 years.
Yeah, great.
However, I never ran the bank as an independent organization because in March of 1985, our bank merged with National Bank of Detroit. It was the time of bank holding companies, and so National Bank of Detroit became the owner of the bank, and so I became responsible to people at National Bank of Detroit on running the bank because I was one of the satellite banks that they owned. So I didn't have a chance to really run it as totally an independent bank.
You've been involved in a lot of local foundations and charity work throughout Flint. Specifically, I know you're quite involved with the Community Foundation of Greater Flint and the Mott Foundation. Can you tell me about how you got involved in both those organizations and why?
I am sure that with respect to the Community Foundation, the Community Foundation was formed, and I'm sorry I can't give you the exact year that it was formed, but it was a combination of two other philanthropic entities that combined. One was a health organization, and the other was the Flint Public Trust. The Flint Public Trust had been formed when the Beecher tornado took place. It was the organization that was established to provide help to all of the people that were affected by the tornado. And that Flint Public Trust remained in existence, and it, along with the Flint Area Health Foundation, those two entities joined together and became the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. When the Community Foundation was established, there was part of the structure of it were members of the foundation, and I became one of the members. I was invited to become one of the members. So I became one of the founding people in the organization. Ultimately, the members, they reorganized the community foundation so that it became, they wind up with trustees of the community foundation, and the position of members disappeared. And I never became a trustee of the foundation. At that point, when they discontinued the member position, I retired. From the C.S. Mott Foundation point of view, the story goes with this, that when I became president, the offices of the Genesee Bank were located in the old Genesee Towers, which was a bank building that was immediately behind the Michigan National Bank building, or the Mott Foundation building now. And I'm not sure that you would know of that, but the building ultimately had to be torn down. But our bank, that was the bank headquarters at the time. My office was on the very corner on the first floor of that building, which was glass on the alley side and glass on the First Street side. So I was basically sitting in a fishbowl, okay? In 1985, I took over the presidency in August of the bank. 2 months later, one afternoon, Bill White walked in to my office and invited me to become a trustee of the Mott Foundation, which basically sort of just took me totally off my feet. Years later, I asked Bill, "Why'd you do that? Why would you pick me?" He said, "Let me tell you honestly." He said, "I had just met with some of the other people who were active in the foundation and talked about who we might pick as new trustees for the foundation." And he said, we had a series of names, and he said many of them were good names, but I wasn't totally comfortable with the names that we had been talked about. He said, "I walked out the back door of the Mott Foundation building and saw you sitting in your office and said, you were the person that I wanted to ask." Why? I don't know, but it was one of the greatest gifts that I could have ever received. You know, Bill was wonderful to me, just wonderful.
What are some of the things that you were fortunate enough to take part of as a trustee of the Mott Foundation?
Oh my goodness. Well, for one thing, I was vice chairman of the foundation for 20 years. We were able to, Joyce and I were able to take one trip overseas with the Mott Foundation and do some site visits with some of the organizations that the foundation was supporting. So we had a wonderful experience going to England, Budapest, Czechoslovakia, Prague. Bill took, my wife was musical, and at the time that we made this trip overseas, she'd been diagnosed with leukemia. And Bill wanted her to have a chance, while she was still well, to have the opportunity to make the trip. And he wanted, particularly knowing her interest in music, wanted her to see the Vienna Opera House. So he took her to the Vienna Opera House so she could see the Vienna Opera House. And then he also took her to Bath, England, which was the birthplace of her grandfather, on her birthday. We did that about 1991 or 2. I cannot remember the exact, but it was around that time that we made that trip. And she did all right. I'm sorry, that's not correct. We had to be, because she wasn't diagnosed until 1993. Unfortunately, I retired from the bank on the 30th of June of 1993. She was diagnosed with leukemia the next day. We went to overseas on that Mott trip in 1994, 1995. That's when the trip took place, which was a wonderful, once-in-a-lifetime experience on this. But let me tell you that the foundation has been tremendously supportive of the city of Flint, and much of its philanthropy has been designated for organizations and places in the city of Flint. I am the fourth of 7 generations that have lived in the city of Flint. My great-grandparents came here in the middle 1800s to farm. And the property between Pearson and Pearson and Carpenter Road. Carpenter is the northern city limits. The property between Pearson and Carpenter, that mile, the east side of Saginaw Street was my grandfather's farm. The west side was my great-grandfather's farm. And my great-grandfather was a gentleman farmer. He had his farm farmed. He hired it farmed. My grandfather raised prize dairy herds on the property. If you go out to that area today, the streets are named Piper, Laredo, Foss, Austin, Ruth. Those are all family names. And in 1919, because the dairy farming had been so hard, my grandfather went out of the business, subdivided the farm, and started to build homes for the General Motors people that were coming into the city of Flint. And that went in the real estate business. And of course, the real estate firm is now over 100 years old and in the 4th generation of the family on this. I got the best of Flint. And because I got the best of Flint, and because my family got the best of Flint, I have always felt an obligation to try to make it better for somebody else who didn't have that chance. And so hopefully, being involved with the Mott Foundation, seeing all of the things that they have done to try to help make the community a better place to live, it's been just a wonderful, wonderful gift.
I'm curious if you might have a piece of advice that you'd like to share for future generations, things that you've learned from your lifetime that is just something you can pass on to other people as a piece of advice.
I guess hopefully what I would hope for most people is that everybody would have a sense of trying to make it better for somebody else. That not only do you have a responsibility for trying to make the best of your own life? But I think you have an obligation in whatever way you can to try to make it better for someone else. When I was president of the bank, every December, we would have a gathering of our bank officers, and it was my opportunity to say to the bank officers how much I appreciated what they had contributed to make the bank a success that year. And I would also try at that same event to pull out some kind of an experience from my own life that I could share with them. And one year what I said to them was, I was raised by two different sets of grandparents. My one set of grandparents, the Piper side of the family, were relatively affluent. My grandfather had gone into the real estate business, built homes for General Motors people, lived in a lovely home, and was able to live a very good life. My grandparents on my mother's side had nothing. My step-grandfather was a jeweler, but he didn't have a jewelry shop. He just did it on the side. My grandmother had to work all of her life, and my mother was raised in extremely modest circumstances. Despite the economic differences in the two families, they both taught me the same lesson. The lesson was that you owe back. My grandfather and grandmother Piper set up an educational fund at the church in 1926 to educate the sons and daughters of the church members with college educations, which turned out to be the saving grace during the Depression years that allowed many of the church members' kids to get college educations as a result. My grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, if there was ever a neighbor who was going through a distressful situation, lost a loved one, had an illness, my grandmother was always at their home with food and with some way of helping make it better. So as I said to the bank officers that Christmas, I said, giving back is not a matter of economics. Giving back is a matter of attitude. And I believe everybody owes back.
That's really quite beautiful. I think there's a lot of people in Flint that could really connect with that message. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anything in this interview that we didn't get the questions either didn't give us an opportunity to talk about or anything like that?
No, I think I rambled on well enough to. I think you got more than what you probably bargained for in the first place.
No, I was just captivated the entire time. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure if there was anything else you wanted to share that we didn't get to touch on.
No, I think you pretty much through with your questions asked most of what I'd be probably contribute on this. I'm not sure why you want a 92-year-old man sit here and talk to you about life, but...
Oh my gosh, I could... I barely have enough fingers to list the reasons why I like doing this, but no, I think this was an incredible experience. Thank you so much for sharing so much wealth of knowledge with me, not only about your personal life, but about some of your philosophies too. I think I can't help but think to myself right now, what can I be doing to give back? Because I also feel very fortunate that Flint has given me a lot in a very short amount of time for someone that wasn't born and raised here. So I I really connect with your ethos of, being
You know,
lazy and getting back.
there are
getting back to
so many people that care. And it's, I look at how so many people are trying to make a difference. And these are, many of these people are people that live in some of the communities that aren't easy to live in, and yet they are working as hard as they can to try to make it better. And I think, anything you can do to try to help them, And it's, it's heartwarming to watch people who not only are trying to make their own lives good, but are trying to make other people's lives good.